Welcome back to the Mold Show. I am your host, Adam Horn. I am a state of Florida certified mold remediator. I have two guests with me today. Al Rabin with Certified Mold Assessments. He's a state of Florida licensed mold assessor, licensed all over the place, actually. And then our esteemed guest, Carly Bayless. Carly is a health practitioner and a national therapy practitioner. Is that right, Carly?
Nutritional therapy practitioner.
Okay, nutritional, national. What am I talking about? But yeah, nutritional therapy practitioner.
Totally.
Can't read my own writing. And you're based out of Tampa?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Well, welcome to the Mold Show. I've been gone for a little while, and I had to be back. I was excited to talk to you.
Thank
We
you.
wanted to get to your story, hear about your experience with mold, and then how it applies to you professionally as well.
Absolutely. So I'm really excited to be here. Al is very near and dear to my heart. He was one of the first people that ever helped me with my initial mold story / saga. And it helped to inspire what I do professionally, working with clients, creating courses, all those sorts of things. And especially because I'm from Florida, we know that mold is a huge issue. And I just continue to see it time and time again. Lack of education about it,
Yep.
or just lots of misconceptions or misunderstandings. And so happy to share about my story in hopes that it would help anybody because it was quite the journey. So I will kind of go back to, so when I was 16, I got really sick pretty much overnight, and we weren't really sure what the cause was. Back in hindsight, we're kind of realizing that mold was a common thread throughout these little periods that I would have. I almost didn't make it through high school, like almost didn't graduate from high school because I was so sick, couldn't get out of bed, like lost 20 pounds, couldn't do anything, almost didn't graduate, almost didn't go to college. So I went to a naturopath who helped me, not specifically with mold, but just kind of strengthened my body. Went off to college, and then my first real big mold exposure was in my freshman year dorm room. And I remember moving in and we're like, oh, the air conditioning is kind of like weird and it looked really dirty and things like that. And within like 2 or 3 weeks of moving in, I was like super swollen, had gained 30 to 40 pounds, and I'm 5'2", so like that packs on real quick. And you're like, what happened to me? Like this happened overnight basically, and was so tired, super just depressed and like sad because I didn't know it was happening. And eventually realized, oh, when I go home and then I come back here, I feel totally different. So I was kind of making these environmental connections. At the same time, one of my family friends, Taylor, was talking to me throughout this whole journey, and she said, hey, I think you should talk to Al. I think he should at least come see like your house at home and see if everything checks out. And so Al coming out and doing an inspection on my family's home was kind of the first thing that really helped us, just pointed us in the direction of a couple things that we could tweak. But the major environment that made me super sick never got tested. I'm honestly scared to know what it would have showed. Probably don't even want to know.
Well, that's scary because I think I shared with you before we started recording that I, less than 24 hours ago, just moved my daughter into her dorm room. So that it's kind of ironic that you just brought that up because it's
Very
a
ironic.
60-year-old building, and my wife was trying to clean the vents and do what we could without being too intrusive in there because clearly we have the same concerns behind the scenes. She doesn't, but doesn't mean we don't as parents.
Oh, for sure. And I think if any sort of awareness had been in our minds, I think we could have done a better job of like knowing or even picking a dorm. You know, I picked because I was like, I'm like, I don't need a nice dorm room. I can have the oldest, jankiest one. And so here I am signing up to be in like the 150-year-old building with Lord knows what sort of HVAC. And it was like window unit and all sorts of stuff. So I do think a lot of it's improved over time, but I think it was like luck of the draw, or, non-luck of the draw, I guess.
Unluck of the draw, right?
Very unlucky. But I'm actually really grateful that it happened because I'd kind of heard of mold, but I didn't
Mhm,
really think it was a major issue. Like, even when I was first sick, I was like, I don't know, I don't see anything. It's probably not a problem. And it was the first time that I noticed that even if, it's not staring you right in the face and it's, growing on your ceiling, it can make you sick without you even knowing that it's there.
mhm.
And that, I think it just raised my awareness level. And even when I talk to patients now, of knowing that there could be something insidious that they just aren't even aware of.
Yeah, I think that's a common thread, and I'll let Al speak to that too because he's commonly interviewing and then out in the field, first guy out in the field, and he's gathering that information from the client. Like, what are you feeling? What are you smelling?
Mhm.
You know, trying to put all the pieces of the puzzle
Right.
together. Excuse me. And then obviously getting out there and inspecting the property.
Yeah, and you mentioned, Carly, it's something you might see on a ceiling, but oftentimes you don't see it. And we hear that I don't see anything that looks like mold in my apartment or my home. So again, we do play Columbo a lot. And once you start going through the history of the home and um, asking the events that have taken place since they've lived there, you learn a lot about the home. And sometimes it just sparks a bell in their head that things have taken place over the years and it was never really very serious to them. Like you said, maybe
Right.
seeing a spot that didn't uh, didn't really initiate any concerns to begin with, but over time
Oh,
they
for sure.
started feeling worse, like you did in your place at school.
Yep, and then my most recent exposure was completely hidden. We've talked about this, Al. It was completely behind a wall, and it was like looked pristine, everything looked fine. And so again, looks can be deceiving. Just because something is new, it doesn't inherently make it better, or newer doesn't necessarily make it better if it wasn't, the proper measures weren't put into place to make sure that waterproofing was done well. So that was humbling too.
Yeah.
Right.
Because we know that new is not necessarily better as people that do this for a living, but not everybody, you know, it's not true really in general.
You said it. I'm currently dealing with a project where that is the scenario. It's newer construction. Um, the homeowner doesn't know the full history before they took ownership
Of
of it.
course. Yeah.
And the concern is they may have inherited some issues that they're not aware of. And that's why testing is so important. I People ask me all the time, I'm a mold remediator. Can I come out and inspect? And I have to give them the same answer every time. Visually, I can come out and see what you can see and maybe point to areas I know that, have a higher likelihood of being affected, but I don't have x-ray vision. This is microscopic, entities we're talking about here. And so without sampling and everything that certified mold assessment Al and Sean and his whole team do, we're all kind of flying blindly. And so
Right.
we need that information a lot of times to see if there are elevations because it's not a question of whether if mold is there. We know that there's mold in our environment. That's why those at-home test kits are not really accurate because you're going to grow molds eventually. What they're trying to determine is it excessive, comparative to all the other areas that they've taken samples at. Where
Right.
does this lie? That's the information a remediator like me needs to start to paint the picture of where we need to get aggressive and open up and look and tear out materials and things like that. So you're right. New buildings, new air conditioning systems, aren't always better. That 150-year-old building could have a brand new, or a good
Right.
maintenance guy, somebody who really does his job and knows it, versus the new stuff which grows mold real quick. So
Yeah. During an inspection, if we see mold, normally that's the minimal part of the entire scope of work.
right,
So it really requires a comprehensive assessment of the home and comprehensive testing. And it's important to know what types of mold you're dealing with, uh,
yeah,
the levels you're dealing with, what their capabilities are from a health perspective. And that's where you've been really helpful, Carly, is working with your patients, understanding that certain species of mold produce certain mycotoxins or endotoxins or actinomycetes that impact them in a way that you really need to know so that you can apply the proper protocol to help them.
Right. Exactly. And different, and everyone has different sensitivity too. Some
Yeah.
people are more sensitive to specific mycotoxins. And again, like this is where we talk sometimes about like ERMI testing, and patients are like, well, my ERMI test for XYZ came back fine. And I'd love for you guys to talk more about why that's not enough. I mean, it's a good initial screening if they're really hesitant to think their mold's even an issue. I'll recommend it. Like, okay, do an ERMI. And if it comes back with something big, then you'll know there's an issue, but it might fall undetected. And it's because certain species of mold have more pathogenic qualities to them, and everyone's sensitivity is different. Like I might react in an environment with the same ERMI versus another environment that has the same ERMI score totally fine, because it's different molds that kind of make up that microbial ecosystem. So if you guys can talk about ERMI for a second and what you think the whole deal is with that, because especially like mold literate providers, like in our line of work, we're like, okay, do an ERMI, or even we used to recommend doing mold plates, which just at the beginning. And you guys know that if a client's doing that, it's very unlikely that they'll get much of a result. And then they're reassured, maybe falsely, that things are good. So if you guys don't mind talking about like ERMI or what these at-home testing things have to do with, people's actual risk from mold.
Yeah, so the ERMI is helpful, like you mentioned, from a home screen perspective. It gives us a good historical perspective of what's gone on in the home. And depending on the type of species, often it gives us a good indication of maybe what type of water event that you might have had. But basically, what it's telling us, there has been a history of some type of water or mold issue in the home. And that's where Sean and I come in and really play, private investigator, going through the entire home, trying to figure out and understand where it's located, what the sources are, what's the extent of the mold issue, so that we can put together the proper protocol and scope of work for Adam. And the beautiful part of how Adam approaches the remediation, and it's very rarely done properly, is he's able to put two and two together. It's not just necessarily the protocol Sean and I put together, or what he sees during the remediation, but as he starts uncovering other issues, he continues on with the remediation process.
Hmm.
Uh, he's able to chase the water, figure out where the
Right,
source began, and water does follow the path of least resistance, so he follows that path, and oftentimes increases the scope of work to protect the family owner, the homeowner, I should say.
Mhm.
But again,
Y-
back, I'm sorry, Adam, go ahead.
No, I was gonna piggyback on what you said. Yeah, I mean, all of the sampling techniques out there, from a remediator's perspective, is just more information for me.
hmm,
We don't know the full history of the home. I know they often ask, "Hey, have you had a renovation done in here?" You'll be surprised how many people say, "Yeah, we just had our bathroom done 3 years ago. We just had our kitchen done 3 years ago."
yep,
Well, when did your issue start? Yeah, no, it wasn't long after that. Well, did that contractor use any type of containment, dust suppression? Did they protect your air conditioning system?
right,
Did they tear ceilings out and dump prehistoric insulation into your environment?
right,
All those things are important to know, because and you can sometimes see the light bulb go off in people's heads, like, you know what, yeah, my bed's right here, and they just did my master bathroom, and
right,
they threw up some painter's plastic, and okay,
yep,
that is an enormous red flag for me, because I know how much time we spend in protecting the non-affected areas, trying to limit any exposures from whatever we're disturbing from getting into areas we're not cleaning. Call it
right,
cross contamination, call it whatever you want.
right,
That's really what mold is. We're trying to contain it. If we're not doing the whole building, contain it off from areas that aren't affected or aren't being cleaned. And contractors just don't do that at all, really. I mean, if you run into a contractor that even does, the minimum, it's beneficial. So those things all matter. So painting the picture, the history, if you know it, is really, really helpful. And most older buildings have had renovations, and so those composite dust scores probably are going to show, you know, uh, uh, that they have all kinds of things in them that could have come from that demo process. or other events.
And that Ermey's just part of the puzzle. When we're
Yeah,
taking air samples and surface samples, we find the types of molds that are detected
yeah.
really match up with the types of molds that we're finding in the Ermey as well.
Right.
Carly, I have a question for you. You said, and I know this from talking to my customers. People have different sensitivities to different molds.
Mm-hmm.
Is it a genetic thing? Is it, how long you've been in that environment? Were you raised in Florida? Were you raised in the desert of Arizona and then moved to Florida? Are all these components like we're trying to put the puzzle together? Are you doing the same with that type of
Yes.
information?
Well, and I do think there's a lot of controversy about the genetic components of it
Hmm.
because there are this HLA-DR genotype, that
Okay.
specific genetic mutation they thought may predispose you towards mold, but I have seen patients get sick whether they have that or they don't,
Right.
just in equal measure. And then maybe if the people have this genetic like predisposition, maybe they're more likely to be sensitive or to
Right.
get sick with a lower level. I just haven't seen enough data to really like be able to elucidate that. So I actually stopped testing the genetics
Okay.
because A, it was expensive and didn't change what we were going to do.
Right.
And B, sometimes it would falsely reassure people. They're like, oh, well, I'm negative for the gene, so it's cool if there's black mold on my ceiling. And I'm like, well, that's a little far. Like, mold
Right.
is still going to be harmful to you whether you have this gene or not. It's kind of like people say, well, I don't have the gene for this, cancer predisposition, so I can do whatever I want and drink alcohol and do all these things. And as much as I want because I don't have the gene. It's like that's not exactly how it works. There's genes, then there's environment, and the combination of those two triggers is what creates that. So, of course, there's the genetic like underpinning to it that's kind of questionable as to how much it actually determines someone's risk.
Right.
But then I believe personally that there is an immune system trigger which creates an activation towards any future mold exposure. And it could be a really profound mold exposure.
Hmm.
I don't think before I had that really bad exposure in my dorm that I was nearly as sensitive.
Right.
I lived in Florida my whole life,
Right.
lived in older homes, had no idea about flooding, anything like that. I'm sure there was water damage because we just weren't aware, which is totally fine. When you know better, you can do better. But at the time, I didn't
Right.
know anything. And so, I think that primed my immune system to then react more
Yep.
in the future. And so it could be mold exposure, like one very strong one. It
Yep.
could also be an infection. I've seen people get mono or something like it, or get a tick bite, something like that, where then after that point, they kind of just their immune system just shifts and it becomes very sensitive. So it could be sensitive to mold, but also to other things like environmental allergens or chemicals when people are spraying their perfume and their Glade plugins,
Hmm.
which whenever I see one, I unplug it from the wall. Don't tell on me.
Right?
Right. Just do it, right? Just like it's not gonna hurt anybody. Oh, I don't know why it came out of the wall. Whoops. But seriously, so these environmental sensitivities, I really think it's because there is a trigger. I don't
Right.
think we're born to be sitting ducks. Like I don't think that's how we were created. So there has to be a trigger to the immune system that then kind of changes the fabric of how it responds. And because there's a trigger, I believe that it's reversible to be extremely sensitive.
I
I
got you.
really do. And I've seen it time and time again. The stronger that the body gets, the stronger the terrain gets, the more we're able to fight off these outside threats.
Hmm.
That's not to say that I recommend that I go stay in mold for 3 months or 4 months, but I bounce back a lot quicker than I used to because I've worked so much on my terrain.
So you're
And I
saying exposure therapy is not something you recommend?
no.
It,
Very rarely does that work out for anybody. If people are like, won't my body just get used to it if I just live in
Right.
it forever? I'm like, if by used to it you mean slowly decline, I guess sure, but
Right.
probably not.
I, I,
exposure and toxic load, right, are really
yeah.
because everybody's
Right.
toxic load is different, everybody's
Yeah.
exposure is different. And when you're taxing your immune system, you're just opening
Yeah.
yourself more and more for underlying health issues to exacerbate or create new ones, right?
Yeah.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah.
Al and I and Sean, we're not medical professionals, but we definitely have more experienced than most with people who are
Right.
battling these things. So over time, we've all formed our own opinions, and it may, in my case, it may be bro science, but what you're saying makes a ton of sense to me. You know, prolonged exposure. Where the difference between us and our ancestors is we live in these hermetically sealed boxes now.
Yep.
So while our ancestors had exposures to molds, they were in more of an open air environment where now everything that's growing within stays within. And so breathing it in concentration or being exposed to it in concentrated levels have different effects on different people. You
Yep.
mentioned earlier, you know, you can see the same molds in a different environment or in different environments, and you may, have a response to one and not the other. Well, that to me tells me maybe moisture comes into play there.
Hmm.
If that one environment has an elevated level of humidity, those molds will be way more active than the other space. Maybe it's super dry in there. And
Right.
so they're being exposed less to the mycotoxins and maybe more to the dust and the spores and things like that. So I'm sure there's so many variables that we'll never be able to cover them all. But
Right.
I think it's pretty clear now. You don't want it growing in your environment,
Right.
and ultimately, whether you know it or not, it may be affecting you in some way.
Right. And I think the more systemic that it is, like the more of a systemic issue that it becomes, the sicker that people are.
Right.
If they say, oh, I had this little thing in this one very isolated area of the
Yeah,
house and it was immediately dealt with, it sends off way less red flags than
sure.
they found some in my HVAC. They found some here, they found some there. And then I'm just thinking, this building is showing an imbalance in the microbiome. Like we talk about the gut microbiome,
Yep.
our balance of bacteria and yeast and fungi that are in our gut. The building has to have a microbiome. And like you had said, Adam, we live in these hermetically sealed
Yeah.
boxes. And it's like, well, if no germs ever got inside, it would be great. But what ends up happening is that we have this imbalance, this kind of out of the natural order, how much we have of certain fungi and yeast and things like that inside of homes and them getting trapped because we don't have great ventilation, great airflow.
Right.
I've seen this so many times. Like I even because now I'm weird and I'm me. I look around when I'm in an environment. I'm like, there's not even a vent in this room. Like you can see where
Yeah.
there's just sometimes absolutely no thought put into that
Right.
and how it's going to imbalance the microbiome of the room.
Well, once and you can't turn that off. So you're an inspector for life. I do it on vacation. I'm in my hotel rooms and
Oh yeah,
elevators and common
yeah.
spaces, and it's
My husband is like a junior inspector. He's looking around. He's like, why would they make that building with a flat roof? That doesn't look very good.
yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah, and not just with molds, but other stressors that we're exposing ourselves to, VOCs, and all the things that get trapped in our environments. Obviously, have an effect on our bodies. And I was kind of perusing your website, and it talks about digestive health and nervous system and metabolic health and hormone balance, and then obviously detoxification. Can you talk to me, and I don't need you to go into depth, but talk to me about how those stressors, molds and things like that have an effect on those things?
I don't know if you've ever seen the biotoxin pathway produced by Dr. Richie Shoemaker.
No.
I can send it to you guys basically, and it's a little nerdy. Sometimes I show it to patients. Okay, TMI, I'm good. It's about how the mycotoxins themselves affect every system of the body.
Okay.
Because, of course, if it's being inhaled, we have innate mechanisms to try to keep that stuff out.
Hmm.
But if you are being constantly inundated with mold, like, the cilia in your airway, they're going to do their best, but they're not going to keep all of it out. And so once the mycotoxins actually hit, as they're being metabolized by the body, that is going to tell you like what type of effect you'll have. And so everybody's body's a little bit different. So some people end up having more of a nervous system issue where they get kind of thrown into fight or flight,
Hmm.
where they can't get out. They're like super anxious or they're super down, super depressed. Their nervous system can get thrown off. Some people, it's a hormonal imbalance. Again, I kind of think it's based on genetic predisposition as well, because every person's body is going to have different predispositions. Some
Yep.
people, it's their gut. Their gut's the weak link, so to speak. So everybody is very different, but it can affect like the nervous system. It can affect digestive health. It can create all sorts of issues that they could do every single digestive health supplement, intervention, whatever, and it would do nothing until the actual exposure is resolved. The
That
nervous
make
system,
Yeah, that
digestion,
makes a lot of sense too.
all those.
Not to mention the other variables, right? You
Mhm.
could be you could be elevated anyways because of a normal stress, and your
Right,
nervous system could stay in fight or flight, and now you're being exposed to all these toxins which aren't going to help, and you're probably going to
right,
react to them more severely than you may if you were in that calm state. So
for sure.
that's great information. So I like what you said a little bit earlier. You've used this word several times, strengthen, instead of taking the approach of take this magic pill, take this whatever it is. Try to strengthen your actual machine, because you're going to have exposures, and then of course I'm assuming you then say, hey, you need to look further into your environment and have testing done, and let's see
Yep,
what it is you're being exposed to in whatever buildings
exactly.
you're occupying.
Yeah. So when it comes to strengthening someone's immune system, the first thing is to avoid more stress.
Hmm.
I always think of like the immune system gets activated and it's like the boy who cried wolf. It's like wolf, wolf, wolf. It thinks everything's a wolf.
Yep.
And so we kind of have to put the wolves out to pasture and be like, everyone leave and let the immune system calm down. And at that point, I look at like the toxin bucket, like what Al was talking about earlier. So if you can
Hmm.
imagine we live in a very chemical filled world. It's not
Yep.
just mold, it's VOCs and all the other things, like you said. The more exposure we've had cumulatively over a lifetime, the fuller that bucket gets. And then I always imagine like the bucket's like on the precipice of overflowing. And then you move into a moldy house and the bucket starts to overflow.
Right.
And when that bucket overflows, that means your body is has too many toxins that it's accumulated that it really can't process. And the mold kind of like clogs the drain, so to speak. So it can't get out appropriately. And so when it comes to helping people clear their mold, there's a couple different steps that you take to approach that. So first is avoiding exposure, because it would be really silly if we were like, here's all the things to help your mold, but just keep doing whatever you want to do and live
Right.
in mold. I always encourage people to not let this become like the new idol of their life.
Mhm.
Like, I'm like, I would not avoid going to places completely because of mold. Like, I'm still going to go to church if there's mold there. Like, it's still important to me, right? So you can't just like totally become a hermit. You have to live your life. When it comes to your home environment, your work environment, places that you're at a lot, making sure those environments are safe and healthy, and avoiding anything you know is a trigger for you specifically. Anything that makes your immune system cry wolf, basically. So it
Yep.
could be foods, it can be mold, it can be chemicals, perfumes, VOCs, things like that. And then we talk about how we actually clear mold. So we usually do urine mycotoxin testing on patients and kind of figure out which specific mycotoxins they have. And the nerd in me really loves getting to match that up with like an inspection report. Like, oh, I
Hmm.
can see that this is something that's happened because of where you live now
Right.
versus this is something that's old, right? If they have a lot of one certain species, I'm like, okay, this really makes sense as to why you need to remediate this environment. Like, you just need to. It's the most important thing. Versus some people, it's an older exposure and they could get away with a little bit less. And so, again, that's part of that whole process. But then we usually recommend binders
Hmm.
and some antioxidant support like calcium D-glucarate and glutathione to help kind of clear that clogged drain, so to speak.
Hmm.
So those are kind of the main tenets of how we work. We specifically choose binders based on which mycotoxins they have. And then we use detoxification support like calcium D-glucarate and glutathione. So that's kind of the base of how we start with people.
Losing you, man. That is awesome information, and I hear a lot of my clients talking about it, but to hear your methodology, it makes sense. I mean, we've all been trapped in the world of the general practitioner for most of our lives, and understand how it's the whack-a-mole method, and they don't really
Yep.
put much thought into treatment for anything. You got young ones, you take them to pediatricians, and everything is treated the same way. Here's your amoxicillin. Have a good day.
Right.
Check back in with me if you think your child is dying. And
Seriously.
so to that's when I hear, you know, people actually focusing and educating themselves out of what is the norm. Um, it gets me excited. I deal with people who are emotionally a wreck over this. It's financially damaging, emotionally damaging. They're worried for their own health. They're worried for their children's health. Their husbands don't think it's real. It's not always that, by the way, but somebody's like, what are you
Oftentimes.
talking about?
Yeah.
Mold's making you sick. Sure. So it can be a big, big problem. And,
Yeah.
you know, talking to clients who are on the verge of tears or crying, over the situation, is a common thing. They scare themselves half to death. They go on and they read on the forums and on the internet and watch YouTube videos that scare them, and that doesn't help. Clearly, they feel even worse after those things. But you know, somehow some of them find their way to us, and we try to bring them back down and start this process of finding out what's really going on, because there are answers. You said it. You can't stop living your life. You can't stop going to the grocery store, or stop going to work, or stop putting your children in school because they're going to have exposures to molds. So controlling the variables you can, which is the environment you live in, I think it should be exactly where you focus most of your energy. Not to say you need to ignore those other things, but um that to me seems like the best use of your energy. And then
Right.
finding somebody like you, for those who are going to see this, if they're local or not, I'm sure there's a network of people out there like you who are on the forefront of trying to answer these questions. And it is complicated. Clearly there
Sure.
are lots of different variables, but that makes me happy knowing that somebody like you is out there. And that's why I thought this would be such a great conversation. we
Yeah.
we are the three tiers of it. They come to you, you refer them to somebody like Al, or Al, they come to Al, he refers them to you, and I'm out there trying to fix the issue, or locate the source of it and correct it. And that's hard to find. It really is.
A lot of
We,
support's required. Yeah.
Yeah.
we've learned a lot from you. And back to the nerd part of you, we always find when we talk to you on the phone, an inspection in one of your patients' home, the sampling that we perform, the urine surface samples seem to correlate with the URMI and some of the mycotoxin testing we perform. And then the testing from the home, oftentimes 90% of the time, correlates really well with what you're finding in any type of clinical testing that you're
Sure.
performing for your patients. So
Hmm.
it turns out to be a really good team to help your
Yeah.
patients and our clients. Because in the old days, mine or Adam's clients used to be told, they were crazy. It was all in their mind, and they were
Their
just
own insurance adjuster would tell them that.
Right.
right.
Right?
Their own husbands, like you mentioned,
Husbands, yeah.
right? Because I would say 90% of our clients happen to be women, and 80% of the husbands
Well,
really don't understand
yeah.
it because they haven't been impacted yet.
I've had it the other way, though. I have.
True.
No,
It goes
Yeah.
both ways. I feel like women, because of our hormones, I think we might tend to be a little bit more sensitive sometimes, or notice things more that are off. And just in the home specifically, especially if they are in that environment more, they might notice it more. I feel
yeah.
like the less you're there, the less you'll notice it, because you
I
can't
think
really
women
track.
have better hygiene, and boys grow up like rolling around in dirt and climbing trees and putting, everything in their mouth. Maybe that has something to do with it too, but I don't know.
Totally. They're like, "What do you mean? It's fine. I just scrubbed it off." Or my favorite is,
Right.
"Okay, we have mold on our HVAC, but we're just scrubbing it off every week."
Yeah.
And they're like, I'm like, "Are you using bleach?" And they're like, "Yes." I'm
Yeah,
like,
of
"Oh
course they are.
no." Of course, we're trying to make the mold real mad. We're just poking the hornet's nest.
Yeah.
But you guys, it is, and even with patients, sometimes it's a hard sell for me, because they want it to be anything but their home, because I think it just makes you question like your own safety
Yeah.
in yourself and in your body, and like it makes you lose trust in a lot of things,
Yep.
because your home is supposed to be like your safe
Yep.
place, and in the span of a couple of hours you can learn that it's contributing to the way that you feel, and that's really hard to process. Very,
Yeah,
very
it
hard.
is.
So, and
It
I
is,
think that's why
especially.
we need all 3 tiers of this. Like, they
Yeah.
need support on every side. Like, they need support from a provider or a coach to help them with their mold, in their body. They need an inspection that's not biased, and they need remediation that's not biased. They need all
Yeah.
3. And that's where y'all come in, and I'm so grateful, because I'm like always like, I'm the body expert, not the home expert or the building expert.
And we are
And
not the body
and
experts, trust
yeah,
me.
I was like, I can tell you what I know, but I can't claim to be good at that. I'll be like, this is what I do in my own house to keep things from getting too crazy.
We
Yeah,
can share what we learned from you with our clients, but we're not the
Mhm.
experts like Adam said
we're
it.
not.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's hard to practice what we preach sometimes, you know. I do my best at trying to keep my house dry, and but I'm like a lot of people too, you know. There there are just things that I don't put enough effort into looking at and keeping an eye on, and I've had to pay the price because of it. You know, I have an air conditioning in my attic, and it has leaked and caused issues, and I should have known better. That's part of, me and Sean talk about this all the time, and Al, we spend a lot of time trying to educate people, not on just what's wrong with their house, but recently I've spent a lot of time in trying to coach people into how to rebuild wet areas to get wet. You know, it sounds like
Yeah, like
obvious, but
bathrooms. Like a bathroom, don't put wallpaper in your bathroom. Don't put hardwood floor in your bathroom. Like,
carpet in your bathroom. How about that one?
oh, I know. It
Yeah.
makes me cringe so hard. I'm like,
I've pulled up a lot of carpet that's wrapped around the toilet, and it's as nasty or worse than you could ever think it was. It's
yeah,
bad.
or using like one slab piece in
Yeah,
a shower or a bath if you can, versus
yeah,
using individual tiles,
yeah.
because grouting, it was
That was
just
a
our
failure
last
point.
issue in our apartment, was that the grouting wasn't done properly, and the
It
water
never
in the
is.
shower was pointing straight into the wall. Yay.
We tore out a $30,000 steam shower
Hmm.
in a new-ish, less than 2-year-old build, and there was already a significant amount of growth all around where there was supposed to be a pan. Um, and you know, they have all this decorative small subway tile and all this grout, all these failure points and areas for moisture to just absorb into and under and around into the envelope of the shower.
Hmm.
And once you start to talk to people about, like, it's grout is sand, if it's and they use a pigment sealer, but it's not a real sealer.
Yeah.
When I talk to people about how sealed is your shower, I say, does it bead off like when you just waxed your car? Because if it doesn't do that, then that moisture is absorbing into everything in that shower.
Yep.
And I will tell you, they go out and take moisture readings in bathrooms that haven't been used in months, and they're still getting elevated levels of moisture months later.
Yeah, it's actually kind of creepy. Like, ours
Yeah,
ours was so high. I remember, Al, you know that from our last report.
yeah,
It was so high. We hadn't used it in like 3 or 4 days when we did the test, and
yeah.
it was just a humid room. It was just humid no matter what, because
Human
it
room.
wasn't vented properly.
Yeah,
And I mean, and I felt like I felt my patient's pain when
yeah,
we were going through that whole process, because we were basically treated like we were crazy,
yeah.
you know, by saying that there was an issue, and even producing the report, they were like, meh,
It's
eh,
not. It's normal, right?
it's
That's what you
normal.
hear.
It's normal. Oh, it's fine. We'll just, it's fine. And then, yeah, it's crazy. And then they go on and lease it to the next person who's unsuspecting. And
Yep,
this whole cycle continues.
yep.
And so it can feel a little bit hopeless. And so in some of like the courses I've made, I try to give guidelines of like, here are some big red flags to look for.
Hmm.
And it's always a good idea to do testing before you move anywhere. At least doing an ERMI for a screen
Hmm.
and having someone come out. It's like, I just think that's necessary, because no matter how beautiful something might look, it could not hold up. Like, how waterproof is sand? Not very waterproof.
Nope.
Yeah, and
Definitely.
Carly, you've experienced with your patients, and then just what you've learned along the way. How long should an inspection take? When an assessor comes out to your home or your
Don't.
apartment, what do you notice while they're there when it's done properly?
It should take a while.
Yeah.
Every room should be treated with the same amount of suspicion. It's not like, oh,
Hmm.
this side is fine, so now we don't really care about this side. Each and every room should be addressed really thoroughly. And just because something looks okay does not mean that it is okay. So, treating everything with a healthy amount of suspicion, because even if it looks okay, you have no idea what's lurking. And I would just say, listen, if anybody's listening to this, just listen to your body. If you do not feel good and something is off, you have to trust yourself and get an inspection and just know that it will all work out as intended. Like, you'll be taken care of. It can feel very scary and stressful at the time, but just to trust your instinct, because you could be saving yourself from years and years of health issues down the line if it weren't to be addressed. Um, I know I do this for a living, and our last exposure, I was kind of in la la land. Like, there's no way that there's mold in here.
Mhm.
You know, I lived in a complex, I lived in this different unit. We moved to a different unit from that unit. And as soon as we moved there, I felt like almost immediately overnight, like something is wrong. But I just blamed it on, oh, I just got married, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of stress, my job, blah, blah, blah. And just wasn't really letting myself even entertain the idea. But I'm so glad that I finally listened to my gut once I did, because it saved us from being there for a while.
The first time we met you at your parents' house, you had a pretty good feeling that something was going on there, and you were
Yeah.
right. And then this last time you
Hmm.
were out there, same type of situation. You just felt when you went from one apartment above to the one below that you felt differently, right? And
Yeah.
at your work, I remember you telling the doctor that you worked for that you just didn't feel right when you were at work. And she was a functional doctor as well, and they had no idea at that time that something was going on
Yeah.
in that office space, but you did. And then when talking
Yep.
to your sister in Chicago, you had a pretty good idea something was going on.
Yep.
Same thing. So just from your experience, you've learned when you feel a certain way, there is probably something going on in the home. And then also, you know what to look for as well. And I
Yeah.
think that's been a great education for you and your family, your sister, your parents.
Hmm.
We did another one for your parents not that long ago, and you had a pretty good
That was
idea.
bad. I know, and a lot of it's rental properties. I don't know if you guys see this more often in rentals.
They don't want me in rental properties. I'll tell you that right now.
I'm sure they don't. I'm
That's
sure
an
they're like,
issue. Yeah.
bye, Adam.
Yeah, apartment complexes,
Mm-mm,
commercial rentals,
not
any
welcome.
rental space where there's a landlord or a maintenance man, it rarely gets to me because as soon as I bid it, they're like, "You're right," and they send somebody out there with a pump sprayer and some bleach and do what they've been doing for the last 50, 60 years and bleach it, paint over it, if even that. So they're, that's why this is important. You have to understand what it is you're dealing with. If they're not willing to take care of it properly, you need to start figuring out a way out if you can, especially if you know it's affecting you. And
Yep.
your story is a little bit of vindication. I have, and I want you to speak to this if you could, because I think this is something I want to take from this. You work in this environment and treat people who have legitimate medical sensitivities,
Hmm.
exposures. It's at least a factor in why they're not feeling good. I often have the question, am I going to feel better after this remediation? Can you speak to this, that
Hmm.
that question? Because of
Yeah.
course I can't say, yeah, you're going to feel great. I don't want to give anybody any type of false sense of security.
Hmm.
But you work out there and you do see people who have had the remediations done,
Hmm.
been through the process, and ultimately are working to get them to feel better.
Yep. I mean, honestly, I think the best thing you can do for mold is to not be exposed. And so if that's what's entailed, if that's remediating, if that's moving, if
Right.
it's really that systemic and bad, because I've seen somewhere I'm like, well, I don't know if you even want to play with that one, because there's so many issues that I just don't foresee all of them being able to be resolved within any sort of, normal amount of
Yeah.
money. Sometimes it just is so systemic and depends on how long it's been kind of unkempt for,
Yeah.
the environment and the moisture level. I think the best thing that people can do is to to avoid the environment. And I see that time and time again that people do get better. People get better. I think that, I don't know, I just feel like there's such a lack of hope in this space when it comes to providers and coaches, people that are working with mold exposure. There is so much hope of being able to get better. Like, you are not stuck. You are not going to feel like this forever. And you just need to kind of take the next right step. And so the first step would be, I would prioritize getting your environment right. Because if your environment's not right, you're like, rowing your boat and there's a giant hole in it. And you're like, let me just get some buckets and take
Yep.
the buckets and
Yep.
get the water out. It's not really going to do much. So that is the best thing I think you can do. And I've had people get better even without actually doing like the detox work and the binders and stuff,
Yep.
just moving or getting the environment remediated
Right.
properly. I always am very cautious of who they're actually hiring to do remediation,
Mhm.
because a lot of times they're like, oh, it's a professional remediator. And then I actually look into it and it's like, oh, it's a general contractor who doesn't actually have any sort of mold remediation license or certification or anything. And I just always tell people, wait, let me check them out before you just like sign on the dotted line, because you want to make sure that it's done properly. So
With
yes,
oversight. With
yeah,
oversight.
oversight.
Yeah.
Exactly. And you want to have a retest to make sure that it's actually gone, because
Without that,
how do you know?
a
How do you know?
remediator could just say, they passed. It looks great,
Yeah, everything's
and
perfect.
yeah. So, and ultimately, and I usually tell people this, and I think Al does too. If you own the home, the only documentation that ultimately matters at the end of the day, if you're going to resell it, is what the test results say. I can tell people, until I'm blue in the face, that we did a good job. And if they're going to resell this property to somebody else, people in this industry understand it now, especially on the real estate side of it.
Right.
A lot of people do. And without the proper documentation, and testing is the only thing that really is, the proof that it was remediated to a standard. Without that, you're putting yourself at risk.
Oh,
And then obviously medically potentially putting yourself at risk, because maybe it wasn't done right. Maybe they made it worse, not
right.
better.
And then I think everyone's timeline's a little different. I do
Yeah.
think if you do more work, like you don't just do the remediation, you take some binders like activated charcoal and things like that for
Yeah.
a couple months. You don't want to overtake these things, and you want to make sure they're very specified to what your specific test results are, because you can overly chelate yourself and take too many metals and minerals out, and things like glutathione and calcium deglucarate. If those things are done, I think it accelerates the progress. I don't think it's mandatory. I'm also not going to chase someone's mold levels to zero because there's urine tests, and I'm not going to keep urine testing them for 15,000 years until they're zero, because we
Mhm.
live in a world that has mold.
Yes, we
But it
do.
is a great tool at the beginning and maybe a couple more times just to see where we're at. And then the biggest indicator is how you feel. So I track symptoms. I have a mold symptom like questionnaire that I use, and that's helping us track symptoms between appointments and see, okay, what needs tweaking. But really just encouraging people to listen to that gut instinct. It starts with recognizing that mold's an issue, but it continues through the whole process of getting better. You have to be listening and watching for red flags and things like that, but you absolutely can get better. I think most people, that timeline, I mean, it can be within a couple weeks of remediation or moving environments. Other people, they've been in it for so long, it takes longer. It could be up to a year before they feel significantly better. But whatever that duration of time is, it's worth it, because mold doesn't just cause immediate effects, it causes long term effects. It increases your risks of Alzheimer's disease and all sorts of cardiovascular like mortality issues and diabetes and all of these things that you are having risks for later that you might not even know about now. So it is worth it. It's worth it. I wouldn't let it yourself go crazy over it,
Mhm.
but it's worth pursuing if it's an issue for you.
Well, it's hard not to feel like you are. One of the things that you talked about is what it does to your nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
And so we all know, if it's upregulating your nervous system, that means it's upregulating your mind.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
people go and they get
It's
caught in
great.
this
Mm-hmm.
hamster wheel.
Yep.
And that's part of it. And feeling better, I think, physically is a piece of it, but feeling at peace or safe mentally is tough for people too. And
Right.
that, in doing so and deregulating your nervous system, ultimately will make you feel better too. And
Sure.
I've often thought that those two things are tied together, whether it's a actual stressor in the environment or not. If you're stuck in that space, you're not going to feel good. And I try to tell people that too, like you have to allow the process to play out. Having somebody like you it would be phenomenal for a lot of people. That's incredible to hear.
Thank you.
Carly, what are some of the symptoms that people should be looking for to give them an idea that, potentially we do have a mold issue in our home?
I will say again, everyone's a little bit different. I see a lot of, I have never weighed this much in my whole life, and I eat really well, and I exercise, and I do all the right things. And that was one of my symptoms. So, of course, I always notice that. They're always like, as soon as we move to XYZ place, they don't say it like this because obviously they would make the connection then. But I'm like, I asked them when's the last time they felt well or before their symptoms. And they're like, and then we moved, and then I gained 50 pounds, and I have no idea why, and all these things. That's a red flag. I see lots of like dizziness and heart palpitations. I see shortness of breath a lot of the times. People just kind of having that air hunger. They can't get a full deep breath in. They have reduced cardiovascular capacity. So when they're exercising, they feel like they can't run as far or do as much without getting super winded and fatigued. Really just extremely deep fatigue that can't really be helped. Like they might feel okay for a couple hours in the morning. They like drop, like they need a nap really, really bad, really quickly. I know when we were in our environment this last a couple months ago, I would be like on a Zoom call and I'd be like, my eyes are going to close. My eyes are gonna close. What am I going to do? Because it was like that 2 o'clock time frame. And I'm like never tired at that time generally. And I was like, that is major red flag. I was getting enough sleep. I do see people get insomnia. Also, they'll pee a lot. They have to pee all the time, or they feel like they have to pee and then they can't pee. And they're really thirsty. Those are the biggest ones that I see. Sometimes hot flashes, like temperature dysregulation. And like this could be in like a 30-year-old guy. They don't have to be like menopausal woman to have hot flashes.
We hear
So
brain fog a lot too. Is it
brain
something?
fog, yes.
That's my symptom.
I
You know what?
can't figure out what the word is. You're like,
Yeah.
the thing with the thing. Yeah. You're like,
Adam just blames it on brain fog. It's got
Yeah, you know what? I have a built-in excuse when my wife's like, "You forgot mold." I was just in a moldy building.
I work with mold
Right,
sometimes.
brain fog. You
I don't
can't
know,
blame me.
whenever I hear brain fog, I think like brain frog, like there's a frog in my brain, like it's just kind of interrupting everything. And
Right,
she's jumping around, like you have no idea where you're going.
brain
But it's
frogs. Yep, I like
brain
that.
fog or brain fog.
Yeah,
And yeah, I think the word recall issues, they're just like, I can't remember things, or I leave the room and I can't remember what I went to the other room for. And the difference, I mean, any of those symptoms could be related to other stuff too. I'm never going to be like, mold is the only thing that can cause these things. But it's that constellation of maybe 5 or more symptoms where I'm like, red flag. Like
yeah,
those things seem too much like mold for completely.
yeah. Man, there's so much information here. Uh, I don't get the opportunity to have this type of discussion on this end of it, and I'm sure this is going to be new to a lot of people. But it excites me because I feel like I have a resource for people
Mm-hmm.
now, because everything you're saying is what I've been hearing for the last 20 years before I was in this weird industry. And it is a weird industry. I was
Mm-hmm.
on the insurance side of things. I was an insurance adjuster. And
Right.
then I got into the restoration field, and then the mold industry became a mold industry. And along the way, information has gotten out there. The people are becoming more aware. There are actual resources and podcasts and people who are dedicating their lives to trying to figure these things out, because it affects everyone. It's not if, it's when you're going to be exposed to water damage and ultimately probably some mold issues in
Right.
buildings. And
Yeah.
so just knowing at least how to handle it, knowing you're not crazy, it could potentially be a serious issue that needs more investigation. And there is a path to feeling better. You said it's something, and I believe this. It's something that ultimately, with work and strength, that you can overcome, and obviously knowledge and improving your environment.
Right.
It's not a a diagnosis for life. It's
Yeah, it's not a life sentence.
yeah, you
A
rung the
lot of
bell, right?
diagnoses are like that
Yeah,
in medicine. It's like, oh, you just are told this thing and then it's a life sentence.
yeah,
Not the case with a lot of things. I'll leave that soapbox for another day, but
yeah,
specifically not with mold because
right,
this is conditional. It's based on environment. It has not changed you irrevocably for the future and forever going forward. Like
right.
there are so many ways to help your body be more resilient.
That's great to hear. Carly, this has been amazing.
Thank you.
I will say it after we're done too. I hope we can have you back at some point.
Of course, yeah.
Because yeah, this is a great discussion, and I think it needs to be talked about a whole lot more because I think it's measured. Nobody here is making any wild claims. I think there is a reasonable approach to handling all these issues. From But it starts with knowing what you're dealing with, and that starts with educating yourself, you know outside of the hysteria that you're going to see and hear online, some of which is real to people, but some of which has been taken and weaponized. And so finding and hearing real stories and is awesome. So
Yep.
I appreciate it. Al, wrapping up, did you have any additional questions for Carly?
No, I've learned a lot. Thank you
Yeah,
very much. This is
yeah,
great, and you should be heard a lot more often.
definitely.
Thank
How
you.
can people get a hold of you, Carly?
So I have a website. It is
Mhm.
carlybayless.com. There's options for working with me. And then I'm also creating a mold masterclass course for people to learn about how they can start to approach this iceberg of helping their body through this whole thing. And that is launching in October of this year. So there's a way to get on the wait list for that, for early bird and all that fun stuff. But yes, would love to hear from anybody. Even if you just have a question, want to reach out in an email, I'm happy to help or answer anybody.
Awesome. And Al, how can people get a hold of you?
They can go to certifiedmoldassessments.com and they can give us a call in our office at 813-789-8209.
And after you talk to these wonderful professionals, maybe you'll talk to me. I don't know. All pro water damage and mold removal experts. If anybody needs to reach out, has any questions, whether we end up working with you or not, if I can help people in any way, and I think we all kind of share that sentiment. That's what we're here for. So appreciate it, guys. Thanks again, and talk to you soon.
Have a
Thank
great
you.
day. Thank you.
All right, so we'll cap it there, and Sean can edit it.
The content in this podcast should not be taken as medical advice. While our goal is to educate, the hosts are not medical professionals, and the opinions expressed are their own. For any health concerns or questions about mold exposure and its effect, please seek the advice of a qualified healthcare provider.